Oh, oh, hey guys. You'd be shocked at how comfortable this seat is. We've got the front steering portion of our soapbox car figured out. We've got the seat more or less figured out. So now we need to build the bottom of the car. We're going to make the bottom out of 3/4 inch plywood because it provides a nice platform and it's nice and strong. So I think we should start out making a little bit of a sketch. Then we'll pull out a piece of plywood and we'll cut it up with the track saw. Let's do it.
Our first step was to measure out the size of the chariot and then determine how far apart we wanted the front steering mechanism from the back of the chariot. I figured out I wanted it to be about 6 feet. Then I made a quick sketch with basic dimensions. I took my dimensions over to a piece of graph paper and looked at it and decided, I didn't really like it when I was drawing it to scale. So I made a few adjustments to the size and the taper on the front of the soapbox car. Once I had the size created, I put the dimensions on it so I was ready to cut. Then I pulled out a piece of 3/4 inch plywood and laid out the dimensions of the soapbox car on the plywood. Here I'm using a chalk line to snap a line across the plywood. That's the easiest way to make a long straight line on a big piece of plywood. Then I'm squaring up the parts of my car, including the tapered edges. And here I'm using a track saw. This is different than the track saw you guys use in the shop. This track saw is portable and allows me to make diagonal cuts over a piece of plywood. Once I finish my last cut, I have the base cut out.
I think the next part of our project here is probably going to be one of the trickier parts. I've been thinking about this for a little while. Don't worry, I haven't put too much thought into it, but I've been thinking about it for a while. And I'm still not quite sure how we're going to do it, but we're going to try something and see if it works. So what we're trying to do now is attach the front end or axle to the base that we cut out. So we've got our base here. We have a tapered front. We want to figure out some way to attach this head tube to the front here so it stays in place so that our front axle can pivot on it. To do this, I think what we're going to do is take these 2 blocks of white oak that I cut out. White oak is a really hard, strong wood. We're going to drill holes in it and we're going to figure out some way to capture our head tube in here so it stays attached to the front of our soapbox car. Let's give it a try.
There were a few goobers left over on her head tube when I cut it off, so I ground those down with an angle grinder. After that, I checked the diameter of the head tube and figured out how wide we would need to drill the hole. Then I took 2 big pieces of white oak and found the center in the pieces. After that, I determined the thickness of our plywood and transferred it over to our white oak. Once I had the thickness transferred, I then decided how far in I wanted to notch the white oak. I went over to the bandsaw and I made a series of cuts carefully on the bandsaw. These cuts will create a small block on the bottom of this piece of white oak that can then fit down through our plywood. Once our block was cut out at the bottom, I then went over to the drill press and I drilled 1 3/8" holes in the drill press. I then cut our blocks in half so we could get our head tube in between them. Once our blocks were cut in half, I went back over to the bench with some yellow glue and glued our blocks together. I had to put a small maple spacer in between the blocks so that our head tube would be tight between them. This occurred because I had to make a saw cut in the blocks, and I had to fill the saw cut in with the maple spacers. Then I grabbed a bunch of clamps and began the painstaking process of clamping everything together. I wanted to make sure that the glue was nice and tight squeezed out between the blocks, and I also wanted to make sure everything stayed perfectly flat. So I had to use more than 1 clamp, as you can see from this video. We've got our head tube glued into our block here with no less than, I don't know, I lost track of how many clamps we're using here, but you can see this thing is glued together. It's definitely not coming out. So now what we want to do is cut a hole in the front of our soapbox car for this little block on the bottom of our block, this little thing right here to go through. So I'm going to cut that out right now with the jigsaw. So our front end's starting to come together. When we pick up tomorrow, we'll work on attaching the bike chariot to the back of our base. See you guys then.